This mind map is designed to be a concise summary of 4 different areas of project activities that we've undertaken in the last 9 months. It looks at the different models of support we have explored. It looks at the resources we've used and developed. It looks at the contact I've had with other staff in the department. And it looks at a couple of workshops and presentations that Ian and I have undertaken to present this project outside of the university. What I'd like to do is to take each of these topics and unpack them a little, and it may be useful to start by looking at the different models of support that we have explored with the different year groups. With the first year students, for example, Ian and I worked with them as an entire year group, and we thought it was very important to start off in our first day with them to explore some key messages about the nature of numeracy and how they'll have different opportunities to develop their math skills during their degree program. We talked a lot about the informal numeracy practices they might find their mentors using out on the ward, out on placement, and the links between those and the more formal calculation methods they might be exploring with us back at the university. We talked a lot about encouraging them to develop a real understanding of problem-solving strategies for nursing tasks and not just learning particular tricks and formulae, which they might forget. So we explored the nature of deep learning and how that may involve perhaps a period of confusion, perhaps, as they learn some new skills, a real sense of challenge. We talked a lot about the kind of anxieties that a lot of students have around developing math skills, and we looked at how the development of numeracy is a lifelong process, really, that we all continue to experience as we take on new roles and responsibilities. The workshop session was very interactive. There were some presentations to the entire year group, but the focus was on getting students to work together, begin to talk a little bit about their needs and to some extent their anxieties about maths, and the session ended with a self-assessment task followed up by some e-learning activities and an online survey that they undertook, which helped us then shape the second session, which consisted of a carousel of active learning tasks. Now this carousel was a set of activities that they undertook in small groups, and they moved around spending 10 minutes on each task, and then at the end of the carousel we, as a large group, we reflected on the different challenges and strategies that they had used. The tasks were all contextualized around nursing tasks, nursing documentation like fluid balance charts, diabetic treatment sheets, but each task had a different format, so we felt it was a very interactive and lively session, and followed up by some e-learning activities in the afternoon. So the focus of those 2 sessions was to present a very positive, engaging message about numeracy development that looked at how numeracy develops out in the real world as well as in the classroom. Those sessions were followed up by some tutorials for those people who felt they needed some additional support, and I stayed in touch with some students by email and sent them some follow-up resources. With the second year students, the model of support was different. They had already begun to develop their numeracy skills using Authentic World, and we decided to explore an embedded model of numeracy support which was based in the Skills Lab session. It was planned by Ian, Tasha, Tracy and I, and involved students working, completing 3 individual drug administration tasks at each workstation. Before the session, they received some resources from me and a screencast that they could watch to introduce them to the format. Then they worked as individuals through the 3 workstations, and then I had a 5-minute debriefing session with them. What was really interesting about that session was that whilst many of them had successfully completed Authentic World, it was very valuable, I think, for Ian, Tasha and Tracy to look at the particular challenges that many of them had in using those numeracy skills for real when they had to read an observation chart or a drug administration chart, and then had to liaise with the patient as well as work out a dosage. So that was a very interesting session and showed a need to value what students could learn through Authentic World, but to build and extend those skills through some embedded numeracy support within the Skills Lab. With the third year students, the model of support was determined by the fact that most students had had some math skills during the preceding 2.5 years, and so there was an opportunity for me to do some team teaching sessions with Chris and Sandra to review some key math skills that they would have picked up through Authentic World, and look at the numeracy practice they had already begun to acquire out on placement, but also begin to prepare for job interviews, which would involve almost certainly a written maths assessment. So Chris, Sandra and I worked together to develop a diagnostic assessment task that students undertook, and then we worked together to run a couple of afternoon sessions where we did some revision activities. If people needed additional support, I then met with them individually or in small groups. And some of those third year students worked together outside of the sessions, formed their own little self-study groups. So that's a quick overview of the different models of support that we used. We developed a whole range of resources during the year. There's a whole bank of graded teaching materials on the Moodle covering these topic areas. If the project continues, I think a key focus would be to continue to develop these materials into the kind of materials that could be used more as open learning materials rather than as teaching materials in the classroom, but that could be done quite easily. Here I've just mentioned some of the teaching strategies that I've learned during the year, which I hope build on some of the practices that students have noticed their mentors using. For example, here we looked at how out on placement some students had seen their mentors using a syringe as a number line, as a teaching aid. So I tried to reflect that practice by developing some worksheets using that as a teaching aid myself. A big challenge for many students is being able to convert grams to milligrams and micrograms. So as well as looking at the traditional method of moving the point backwards and forwards 3 places to divide or multiply by 1,000, I spent some time developing with students this place value chart, which aimed to give them an opportunity to understand the value of each figure behind the decimal point, so that the process of conversion was less was based on understanding rather than the trick of just moving the point backwards and forwards, which for some students can be quite confusing. There were some mnemonics that I explored to explain the traditional nursing formula. From the conference I attended in March at Ipswich, I found this particular mnemonic that a nurse educator in London was using to explain the traditional nursing formula using NHS, what you need, the amount you need, divided by what you have times the stock solution. So that was a nice mnemonic that I know several students have found useful. We looked at infusion rate problems and looked at how we could use a little formula triangle there to help them begin to work out what kind of strategy they would need to use with different kinds of problems, depending on whether they needed to work out the volume, the rate, or the time needed. And throughout, I tried to emphasize the importance of looking out for the particular strategies that their mentors were using out on placement, even when their mentors may themselves not be that confident as numeracy teachers. But I was very keen to build a link between what we did in the classroom to what they saw out on placement. Much of the materials that we developed were in using different e-learning tools, and if you have time, I have put here links to some of the e-learning materials that we developed. So if you just click here, you will see some of the e-learning modules that we developed. If I click on this one, for example, you could see that opens up a particular package here, which includes little screencasts. Pause that for a moment. To explain particular topics. So these particular modules, students could work through again and again. There's a little audio commentary from me that they could hear here. Then there were little quiz formats that they could work through, self-correcting quiz formats there. So if you have time, you could have a look at the other e-learning tools that we use. We used Camtasia to record several screencasts. We used a website called Quizlet, which uses flashcard-based activities and questionnaires, materials on BBC Skillswise, and some excellent materials from the Queen's University Belfast that Sandra mentioned to me, which were very useful. Our most recent activity has involved a revision of the literacy and numeracy assessments that are used when interviewing new students. So altogether, it's been I would say, quite a productive year in terms of resource development. In exploring those different models of support and developing those resources, I've had a fair bit of contact with staff around the department. At the beginning of the project, I met with most of the staff individually and explored with them the particular difficulties they thought their students may have at particular times of the course. I worked with Tasha and Louise in developing a couple of new resources. This is work still to be completed, really. I was working with Tasha on developing an e-learning module around the cardiovascular system, and I was working with Louise on looking at how we could make her module on reading an ECG graph a bit more accessible. Many of the resources we shared with other staff by email. I spent a fair bit of time, and it was very productive time, to work with both Chris and Sandra, developing the team teaching sessions, and I also spent some time with Tasha in the skills lab, looking at the particular resources, the syringes, the kind of boxes of tablets and medication products that are used there, and that was with a view to developing the embedded numeracy support model. Finally, just like to mention a couple of contacts we've had outside of the university. I was asked to present a quick overview of our project as it was at that time at a conference in March in Ipswich, which was very interesting. I met Kerry Wright there from the University of Greenwich, and I found my contact with her was very productive indeed, and several of her teaching strategies I've explored in my own work with students. And in October, Ian and I have been asked to present a workshop on numeracy support for nurses called Exploring a Social Practice Approach, which identifies some of the key messages that I've tried to highlight in this mind map, really, about trying to build some links between the numeracy skills that people are learning out on placement and the support that we've offered them at the university. So this mind map has been useful as a quick summary. Obviously, if you want to find out more information about these particular topics, if you download this mind map, you'll see that there are links to different resources that will give you more information about those topics. I hope this has been a useful format.